Welcome to the Talent Exodus Challenge, where I'm putting my squad building skills to the ultimate test. Imagine building a winning team only to see your best players ripped away from you at the end of every season. That's the challenge we're facing, and it's going to take everything we've got to succeed. So let's dive into the rules. The objective is straightforward: to achieve sustained success while constantly losing our top talent. Winning league titles, cups, or even a major continental trophy is the goal, but we'll have to balance finances, develop youth, and adapt our tactics to get there. We're starting with a mid-table club. No rich clubs or title favourites here. We'll build from the ground up, starting with the players we have and any additions we can make in the first window. But from season 2 on, the challenge truly begins. At the end of each season, I have to sell my top 3 players based on their average match rating. These are the best performers, so not the bench warmers. We're losing critical talent every season. No delays, no exceptions. They're gone within the summer transfer window. And here's where things get even trickier. We need to keep a transfer profit each season, and we're only allowed to invest 75% of what we earn from our sales. The rest just goes back to the club, meaning we can't just replace our top players like for like. And once they're gone, they're gone. No buybacks allowed, even if they're on the transfer list or available for loan later. We have to keep moving forward and building from within. To add to the challenge, I can only sign players worth up to 75% of the highest sale price in each window. The challenge is considered complete when we've achieved these 3 goals: winning the league, winning the Champions League, and achieving 5 consecutive seasons in European competition. So, can we rebuild a winning team every year, even as our best players are taken away from us? Let's get started with the Talent Exodus Challenge. Brighton seem like the obvious choice to attempt the challenge with. They finished 11th in the Premier League last season, and Football Manager predicts they'll be 10th this year, so about as mid-table as you can get. And as they're traditionally a selling club, the challenge rules align pretty nicely with their club principles and vision. One small problem though: they don't have any transfer budget in the first season, so we're missing out on an opportunity to stockpile players before the rules kick in. But thankfully, the Brighton squad is full of young, valuable players like João Pedro, Julio Enciso, and Evan Ferguson, so we shouldn't be punished for it too much. And in real life, they've just had a very out-of-character spendy summer, after losing the likes of Caicedo and McAllister the year before, with a net spend of nearly £150 million. So we're timing this just right to get Brighton back to their roots. We start the save with £50 million in the bank and minimal transfer debt, so it'll be interesting to see how those numbers change over the years. And without any money to spend on players, I keep myself busy over the first summer overhauling the backroom staff, because I think developing young players is going to be crucial to the success of the challenge. We got off to a good start with early wins over Aston Villa and Nottingham Forest before coming down to earth with a thump, getting knocked out of the League Cup by Plymouth and losing at home to newly promoted Southampton. The transfer deadline passed with no ins or outs to the club, and then we followed up with 2 big wins over Bournemouth and Manchester United before losing 4 in a row, then beating Manchester City. At this point, I have absolutely no idea if we're good or not. We had a nice little 7-match unbeaten run during December when we never really played against anybody any good, and by the time the January transfer window opened, we were sitting pretty in 6th place in the league, just 1 point outside of the Champions League qualification spots. At this stage of the season, our 3 best players, so the ones we'd have to sell at the end of the season if they were still the 3 best, were Solly March, João Pedro, and Ferdi Kadioglu, with Tariq Lamptey and Carlos Baleba not yet meeting the minimum of 15 games played to qualify. I don't think that'd be too disastrous if they're the 3 we end up losing. João Pedro wouldn't be ideal, but with Evan Ferguson and Julio Enciso at the club and basically being kept out of the team by him, we have ready-made replacements, something we have to work on maintaining throughout the challenge. We still basically had no money to spend in January, but we had quite a few players who wanted to leave because this is a large, bloated squad at Brighton, so we set about trimming the fat, with loads of fringe players and youngsters being sold for minimal fees, and Igor and Mats Wiefer going out on fee-paying loans, all of which generated enough money to bring in Matthias Rice from Sporting for £11 million on deadline day. From this point on, the transfer rules kick in, and we'll only be able to spend 75% of our sales total each window, with the maximum individual fee we can spend also set at 75% of the highest individual sale. I'm going to have to do some maths, quite a lot of maths. Our good form continued through January, although Villa got revenge on us for beating beating them earlier in the season, and we got knocked out of the FA Cup in the 4th round by Liverpool, having needed a replay to get past Middlesbrough in the 3rd round, which meant with us out of all the cups, we needed to qualify for Europe through the league to get started on our 5 consecutive European qualifications objective, which seems doable with us in 5th place, 3 points behind 4th and 4 ahead of 8th at the start of February. At which point, the wheels came off, with us winning only 1 of our next 9 games, leaving us down in 8th place and outside the European spots with 12 games to go. We staged a mini recovery with a draw against Liverpool marking the beginning of a 4-match unbeaten run, but it wasn't enough and we ended up finishing the first season down in 10th place in the league, 5 points behind our rivals Crystal Palace, who were sat in the Conference League qualification spot. Not the first season I had in mind, but to give Football Manager some credit, it is the exact position the game predicted we'd finish in before the season began. But now, the shenanigans begin. Our top 3 players who now have to be sold are Jacob Mulder, Carlos Baleba and Evan Ferguson, and I'm particularly upset about Ferguson, who I feel like we only really scratched the surface with him only starting 17 games, but scoring 15 goals. I can't help but feel that if he started for a full season next year, he'd fire us to a top 5 finish, but rules are rules, and he has to go, which proved to be a lot harder than I expected. Mulder was easy enough. He'd already agreed to leave for free at the end of his contract and was off to Saudi Arabia, which got him off the books, but was a disaster for reinvestment because 75% of zero isn't enough to buy a Premier League quality replacement for him. Baleba and Ferguson were both offered out as soon as the window opened, but there was very little interest. Thankfully, Newcastle decided to help me out, offering £63 million for Solly March, which set the bar for our maximum incoming transfer at £47 million. We eventually got £23 million for Baleba and a disgustingly low £35 million for Ferguson, and combined with some fringe players and youngsters going, Igor leaving permanently for a massive £39.5 million, and backup keeper Bart Verbruggen going for £42.5 million, meant we had total player sales of £246 million, which gave us a £184.5 million transfer budget based on 75% of that total, which is more like it, if you ask me. We started by trying to replace the positions of the key players we'd lost, with Sergio Busquets coming in to replace the 2 midfielders, and Matheus Cunha coming in for his relegation release clause of £22 million from Wolves to play up front. Dennis Mann came in as another wide attacking option, and Michael Coyote came in to replace the departing Joel Veltman at right back. We broke our club record transfer for Ollie Watkins from Aston Villa to properly replace Ferguson, brought in Sebastian Coates because he's cheap and a massive goal threat from set pieces, and then used up the rest of our kitty, bringing in youngsters like Andre, Valentin Carboni and Sver Halsef Naipan for just £4 million, who'd been attracting interest from much bigger clubs than us. He was a bargain. By the time the transfer window closed, we'd spent £167 million, £17.5 million below our allowed budget, so that rolls over to the January window and we're all set for season 2. It feels very strange for me to end a transfer window with a larger budget than I started with, but the Brighton board would have been happy for me to spend another £87 million. The club bank balance has already more than doubled since the start of last season, so we threw as much of that as we could at improving our training and youth facilities to help all our shiny new wonder kids develop into Champions League winners, and kicked off the season with a bang, winning our first 3 matches before once again getting caught out by West Ham. We had a pretty tough run of fixtures early on, at one point having to face Chelsea, Man City, Liverpool and Arsenal in consecutive league games and not winning any of them. But once we got past those, we went on a 4-match winning run that included a 4-3 away win over Manchester United. Spurs tried to spoil the party, beating us 3-2 at the start of December, but we then didn't lose another match in December, and by the time the January window came around, we were 5th in the Premier League and into the semi-final of the Carabao Cup, with Ollie Watkins only 1 goal behind Erling Haaland in the race for the Golden Boot. It was at this point that I realised I needed to adjust my transfer policy a bit, because signing a load of squad players like Dennis Mann and James Rodriguez just led to a bunch of them getting unhappy very quickly about lack of game time. So we ended up selling 5 players that I'd signed during the January window, with Busquets, Rodriguez, Reece, Mann and Burnaby all leaving, along with Adam Webster, for a combined total of £48 million. 75% of that is £36 million, plus the £17.5 million we'd saved from the summer, meant we had £53.5 million to spend in January, and this time I tried to focus on young talent and players we actually needed, rather than just hoovering up all the bargains I could find. Amir Richardson, Kaio George and Mads Beck Sorensen all filled important squad spots, and Simone Pafundi was my first proper tactical investment in the future. We paid £10 million for him, but then immediately loaned him back to Udinese to continue his development to try and avoid what I'm now calling the Evan Ferguson problem. Total spend for January was just under our limit at 51.75 million, but we can't carry that over from one season to the next, so that remaining 1.75 million pounds is now lost forever. While all this was going on, we went unbeaten in all competitions through January, booking a spot at Wembley and a chance for European qualification in the Carabao Cup, beating rivals Crystal Palace 5-2 on aggregate. We also went on a destruction tour of the East Midlands in the FA Cup, knocking out Derby, then Forest, and in the league we beat a load of relegation fodder, although still couldn't beat our bogey team West Ham, to leave us sitting in a Champions League spot at the start of February. Very familiar from last season, and with that horrible run of fixtures against the Big Six on the horizon, we were determined to not mess up again this time. We beat Liverpool and Chelsea before losing to Manchester City in the league, then Arsenal at Wembley in the League Cup final. We then finished off the run of evil matches with a very respectful 2-2 draw with Arsenal in the league. And although we were out of both cups, we were in with a great chance of qualifying for the Champions League. We won our next 3 games convincingly against Villa, Fulham and Manchester United, had a slight hiccup losing away at Everton, but that was our last defeat of the season, and we finished things off with a nice little 5-match unbeaten run, a 4-0 win over Newcastle on the final day, and a 3rd place finish in the Premier League, which meant Champions League qualification, and with it, the first stage of our Qualify for Europe in 5 consecutive seasons objective. We were well behind the top 2 of Liverpool and Manchester City, so I don't expect us to be in a title race next season or anything, but Europe is always fun, and this is definite progress compared to season 1. But of course, we now need to sell our 3 best players, which means wonder kid Sver Helsiv Naipan is gone after playing just 16 games. The Evan Ferguson problem strikes again. Plus Brazilian attackers and providers of 49 goal contributions between them over the season, Matheus Cunha and João Pedro. I'm pleased that I get to keep Ollie Watkins, who despite scoring 26 goals, averaged only a 6.96. Maybe we need more players like him who don't contribute very much outside of scoring a load of goals. In addition to those 3, I've also got Pervis Estupiñán and Jan-Paul van Heck telling me they're going to run down their contracts. So I think in the interests of being able to reinvest in proper replacements, I need to cash in on them now too. So despite a great 3rd place finish, we're now losing 5 key first team players and have to figure out how to replace them. Thankfully, shifting players was a lot easier this summer. Presumably, my overperforming boys were in demand after such a good season. Our biggest sale of the summer was one of several who headed to Saudi Arabia, with Matheus Cunha joining Al Ahly for £52 million, meaning my maximum incoming transfer fee was set at £39 million, 75% of his fee. You know how this works by now, right? Estupiñán joined him at Al Ahly for £26.5 million, and Van Heck joined Al Hilal for £18.5 million. João Pedro took a little bit longer to move on, but eventually joined Aston Villa for £39 million, and Naipan went to Union Berlin for a cut price £21 million that felt way too low. I feel like we're going to see more of that boy as the save progresses. With a few more fringe players moving on throughout the summer, our total transfer income for this window was £192.5 million, meaning we were allowed to spend £144 million. We moved early in the window to bring in promising youngsters Stanis Idumbo Mazambo, Junior Krupi and Kylian Sildilia for a combined £78 million, then added Ilyan Melier for £28 million to take over in goal from the departing Jason Steele. Angai Nyanzu joined for £28.5 million to be a big meaty boy at the back, and then just as the season was starting, we pulled off the deal of the summer, bringing in Ruben Neves on a free transfer at the end of his Al Hilal contract. We had to give him a big salary because he'd been used to Saudi Arabia money, but at still only 29 years old, he has plenty of time left to either become a key part of the team or generate a big pile of transfer money for us to reinvest. Ideally, he'll do both. Our total spend ended up at £134.5 million, allowing us to roll £10 million over into January, and by the time the window shut, we still had a transfer budget of £160 million, and our wage budget had nearly doubled since the start of the first season. The club was completely debt-free and about to play in the Champions League for the first time, so the financial situation is only likely to continue to improve. Despite all the personnel changes and last season's 3rd place finish, the media are still predicting a 9th place finish for us, which suggests we haven't improved improved the team a huge amount over the last 2 years, but we started the season with a 2-0 win over Liverpool to prove the doubters wrong, with debut goals from Simone Profunde and Ruben Neves. We then lost to Tottenham and Manchester City, so it wasn't all sunshine and roses, but I had high hopes for the season and a first Champions League game against Real Madrid to look forward to, which we ended up winning 3-0, thanks to another goal from Neves and big Sebastian Coates doing exactly what I signed him to do. We had a nice little unbeaten run in the Premier League, but got knocked out of the Carabao Cup on penalties by McDonald's, which did sting a little. Between September and January, we only lost 3 times outside of the MK Dons game though, losing to Newcastle, Brentford and West Ham, again in the Premier League, and taking the Champions League by storm, becoming the first team to qualify for the knockout round and adding an away win against Roma to our list of big European victories. By the time the transfer window opened, we were in 6th place in the Premier League, level on points with Manchester City and only 2 points behind 4th place, but 10 points behind top of the table Spurs, so effectively out of the title race for another season. The priority now was getting as far in the Champions League as we could and making sure we qualified for it again next season. Defeats in our next 2 games against Spurs and Liverpool made that a little bit more complicated, but we recovered with a 2-0 win over Man City in the Premier League before losing narrowly to PSG in the Champions League, but following up with another famous European night, beating Atletico 4-2 thanks to an Ollie Watkins hat-trick. We ended up finishing top of the Champions League stage, level on points with Real Madrid, and quite frankly, that'll do. And we might have to win it to make sure we're in it again next season, as Premier League results left us 6 points behind 4th place as the transfer window closed. And on the topic of the transfer window, we had that £10 million that we rolled over from the summer and added to it by moving on some of my previous signings that were frustrated at lack of first team opportunities, with Carbone, Nianzou and George leaving for a combined £56.5 million, which meant we had a total budget of £52 million to spend on new players. Felipe Anderson came in to give us some much needed experience, and our only other permanent signing was Nino for £24.5 million to replace Nianzou at the back. I also did a couple of fee-paying loans with optional future fees and wasn't completely sure how to allocate these to my budget, but decided it made most sense to add their loan fees now, and then if we sign them permanently, that would come out of next season's budgets. So we could only activate their clauses if we'd sold enough players for enough money before their loans expired. Winger Jaden Adai joined from PSG, and left-back Destiny Udogie came in from Tottenham, bringing our total spending for January to £30.9 million, well under budget, but with players getting grumpy about not being in the Champions League squad, we couldn't risk rocking the boat by bringing any more players into our already pretty big squad. Even with that big squad, we found balancing the Premier League and Champions League a challenge for the rest of the season, losing to Luton, Villa, Wolves and Crystal Palace in matches where we tried to rotate the team to keep players fit. Having finished top of the league stage, we skipped straight through to the round of 16 in the Champions League, where we faced Atalanta, who beat us 1-0 in Italy in the first leg, before we turned it around back in England with a 2-0 win with goals from Profundi and Neves, who both seem to show up in big games more regularly than the rest of the squad, which potentially spells trouble for next season, as they're both way ahead of the rest of the squad for average rating. The quarter-final of the Champions League drew us against Manchester United, who took a 2-0 first-half lead in the first leg at the Amex, before late goals from Matoma and Watkins rescued us, but left us with still a lot to do at Old Trafford. The second leg followed a similar pattern, with United 2-0 up at half-time, before that man Ruben Neves turned up again with another crucial goal, but unfortunately it wasn't enough and we were out of the Champions League and also down to 8th place in the Premier League because of the points we'd dropped rotating the team trying to get back into the Champions League. With 6 games to go, we had a lot of work to do to get back into Europe of any flavour, never mind the Champions League, but we did have a potential backdoor route. We were still in the FA Cup. And just a few days after our Champions League exit, we were at Wembley to face Liverpool in the semi-final. We took the lead on the hour mark with a penalty from Neves and thought that was job done until Liverpool equalised in the 94th minute to send the game to extra time, where they then took the lead before Matoma's 116th minute equaliser. We thought we had it won with a minute to go, but Ollie Watkins' goal was disallowed and we were heading for penalties, where we were relentless, scoring all 5 of ours before Cody Gakpo hit the post with Liverpool's 5th kick to send us to the final, where we would be all that stood in the way of Tottenham completing a domestic double. and we can't have that. We continued our frustrating habit of losing to teams we should be beating by losing to Fulham in the next match, but wins over Everton and West Ham finally got us back in the hunt for a top 6 finish. And despite a little wobble against Arsenal and Manchester United, we beat Chelsea 3-0 on the final day to secure 6th place and a Europa League spot. Or 2 Europa Leagues in spot. Presumably we can trade 2 Europa League spots for 1 Champions League space. I think that's how it works. Because a few days before the Chelsea game, we'd won the FA Cup and done it fairly comfortably too. Spurs took the lead after 1 minute, but Pafundi equalised on 5 minutes in what would likely be one of his final matches for the club in what has been a fantastic one and only season at Brighton for him. And of course, Ruben Neves had to weigh in with another crucial goal to make it 2-1 early in the second half, bringing his total for the season to 11 goals in all competitions from defensive midfield, which will do very nicely. And then Mitoma secured our first trophy of the save with our third in the 87th minute as Spurs chased an equaliser. So all in all, not a bad season considering we lost half of last season's 3rd place team before the season began. We're back in Europe next year, so that's 2 of our 5 consecutive qualifications done, and we were great in the Champions League and felt pretty unlucky to go out the way we did. We showed in the league stage that with a bit of luck that competition will be winnable, but dropping down to 6th place in the Premier League isn't ideal. We need a great summer of transfers, especially as we're going to have to replace arguably the 2 standout players of the series so far, with Pafundi getting a quite incredible 39 goal contributions from 53 games as a 21-year-old playing in his first season in English football. He is going to be a megastar. We're also going to lose our inspirational leader and scorer of vital goals in big matches, Ruben Neves, and 17-goal centre-back Sebastian Coates, who's making it doubly difficult to replace him in his goals because he's already leaving on a free transfer at the end of his contract. We're going to need some big fees for Pafundi and Neves if we're going to find players good enough to replace them and also improve the squad. And next season will be a big test of how good of a conveyor belt of young talent we're building with all these wonder kids we're bringing in. We just need 2 or 3 of our current fringe players to have breakout seasons like Pafundi's just had, and we'll be laughing. And that's where we'll pick things up in the next video. So please make sure if you've enjoyed this one, leave a thumbs up on it for me, subscribe to the channel for loads more Football Manager content, and thank you very much for watching.